Like to welcome everyone to our November school board meeting. Call the roll, Mr. Basser.
Mr. Jewell,
Here.
Mrs. Lanehart,
Here.
Mr. Dunkman,
Here.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Here.
Mr. Moore.
Present.
Like for everybody to stand and do the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hook for the student recognitions.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell. Members of the board, we have a couple people here I wanted to have share a little bit about their fall. And first up, I'm going to have Mr. Augustine, our Director of Athletics, move forward and take the podium.
Thanks for having me. Loud.
Why are you yelling?
Pretty demanding. Okay. Thanks for having me. I'd like to recognize tonight Coach Reidinger and his team, girls varsity golf. Around last April or May, we started talking about girls golf, and Donnie had some ideas on how to expand it, and he went to the middle school and met with girls and tried to push it. So we had our inaugural varsity golf season this year. I'm going to let Donnie come up and talk about that for a little bit, say a few things, and then we'll recognize the girls.
So, Mr. Augustine's accurate in saying that we had to recruit, and so we were able to do some of that at the on the day that the freshmen come up to visit the high school. We had a table with a sign and information out, and I knew that my daughter Annie wanted to play, and she was taking some lessons and things, and she's like, well, I've got these friends who want to play, and I'm like, well, we're off to a good start. And Haley was on the team last year that they had under Coach Witt, so I knew we could get at least 4. So we were able to actually get 12 kids actually signed up, and 6 actually showed up. So well, that's good. You only need 4, and we had 6, and so we went 5-3 in our first season. We finished 9th in the sectional, which is not great, but they're young, and we will hopefully improve as we move forward. So I just want to recognize the girls tonight. Freshman Elsie Dobbins. Freshman Grace McIntosh. Freshman Annie Reidinger. Sophomore Haley Saylor. Junior Aaron Reidinger. And we have another junior who's not here tonight. She is sick. She missed school today. Paige Reuter. So.
Thank you.
Next up, I want to introduce Mr. Dave Slammer, our high school principal, and recognition.
All right, thank you for having me. Just a couple things before I introduce Andy here and talk about her. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was, as most of you know, we've kicked off a PBIS program at the high school. We took an idea that I stole, and we stole from many other schools and kind of made it ourselves. And basic idea was wanted to make little schools within a school. And so we divided our students up into what we call 4 tribes. And we've had a couple different activities that we've done so far. Wrote letters to troops. Really want to focus on some actionable things. One of the hard things about PBIS at a high school level is making it's an inherently kind of elementary idea, but how do you make it usable for high school students? So as we grow the program, our goal is that you'll see our students out doing service learning projects, things of that nature. So that's been fun to work on that and help that grow there. Second piece that I have for tonight is kind of interesting in the fact that I've never once seen Andy play a game. But what I think more impressive than anything, obviously, if you're getting a Division I scholarship, you've got some talent. But when I got there, Andy was injured, and in most cases, when you get a kid, I've been lucky enough to be around Division I athletes before. And a lot of times you would probably see that person when they're injured kind of back away from the team a little bit. She did the exact opposite. She was, I think, just the team shrink, team manager, I think yoga instructor at some point. I mean, there was all kinds of things going on that she was doing behind the scenes. So to me, that shows the type of person she is as much as anything. So no matter where soccer takes her, I hope that she continues to be that great of a person, because that's going to take her pretty far in life. But for tonight, what we want to honor her on is being a Division I full scholarship athlete. So congratulations, Andy. All right, and the last piece from the high school tonight, I want to bring Mr. Oliver up. He's on a strict time limit. Bring Mr. Oliver up here and talk a little bit about, check your watches now, it's 2 minutes. But give you a little bit of insight into the band season and some of their pretty awesome accomplishments so far.
First of all, go ahead and put your watches up. I will follow no time rules. I was up here last month. We had just qualified for state finals. I did some research. Out of the entire state, 131 schools qualified for state finals. Only 17 of those were schools that are our size. And out of those 17, only 5 of them received a superior rating. So a pretty elite company. Our band was rated excellent by our state at state finals, November, whatever it was, 9th. So super proud of that. We've been to state now twice in 3 years. Kids work really hard. We had Grand National Championships, Bands of America, on Friday. 3 years ago, our band was dead last in the country at this event. There are typically 120 schools. We were dead last. The lowest score scored like a 51. Terrible. In the last 3 years, we've managed to jump 28 of those schools. So in a national event with some killer programs, we've jumped 28 of them in the last 2 years. So really happy with our growth, with what we're doing, expecting more big things next year. So I want to call up here our 2 drum majors, Miley and Kendall, for their terrific leadership in our program. These girls kind of do it all for us. They kind of go first for me. Great leadership. They're really selfless and always put our program above everything else. So really happy for these girls in our program. Thanks, guys. Do we have any questions? Cool. I'll shut up then. Thanks, guys. Don't worry, I will talk some more.
never been an issue for somebody. Outstanding. And that concludes my section of program recognition. And for those students and parents, thank you. We're going to start into the business portion of the meeting, so if you feel the urgency to leave and go have supper or do something constructive, that's you're welcome to stay, but this will be your opportunity. No.
Stay right where you're at.
That's okay. We're good. We'll get you next time.
I have a sports banquet to get to.
You have what?
Sports banquet.
Now, we're at our visitor comments. Do we have any visitors that, want to come up and address the board? And then we'll move on to the treasurer's report. Mr. Bassler?
Thank you, Mr. Jewell. No non-action items this month. I think we're all conferenced out for right now. We'll save it for springtime. So to get to it with my action items, we'll need approval for the minutes from the last regularly scheduled board meeting, which was October the 28th.
Need a motion?
So moved.
First by Mr. Dunkman,
Second.
second by Mrs. McIntosh. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Dunkman,
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore. Next, as part of your packet was a financial report. I'll talk a little bit more about finances on my next one, so I won't get too detailed in here. I need approval for the financial report for the month, unless anybody has any questions.
Need a
So
motion? First by Mr. Moore,
Second.
Go ahead. Ryan.
second by Mrs. Lainhart.
Got me.
Again.
He's always listening to the woman.
Hey.
Smart man.
He's a smart man.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart,
Yes.
Mr. Dunkman,
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Yes.
and Mr. Jewell.
Yes.
Okay, the last thing on the agenda for me is a 5-year forecast. As I said last month, as part of the budget, they, for some reason, moved the 5-year forecast from approval and submission to the state of Ohio by October 31st. They moved it to approval and submission to Ohio Department of Education by November 30th. So it wasn't on last month's agenda, and it's on this month's agenda. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it unless you have more specific questions. I'll just kind of highlight big picture, kind of where we are. A lot of the forecasts over the last couple of forecasts that I've done, I've talked about having 2 years of money, and then in the third year, we start spending more than what we receive. And we were able to make that last really for more than a year by continuing to stay conservative and doing our best to reduce our expenses wherever we can. This past year, we had an insurance hit through the EPC, through our insurance, which we took a 17% increase. I did not have that much. I had about half of that budgeted in the forecast, and I think we talked about that before. So we have some greater expenses on the insurance side than what was in the previous forecast. Big picture wise with this forecast, for this year, still looking and trending that we're going to bring in more dollars than what we're going to be spending. Next year, the trend starts to switch. I know before when we did levies and we talked a lot about, your revenue pretty much stays the same, and it grows a little bit because we have the income tax, but expenses continue to rise at a greater rate than your revenue goes up, and at some point they're gonna cross each other, and then we have to go for a levy. We talked, when we passed the original levy in 2013, that we're gonna make it last for 5 years. Well, we've made it last for 5 years, and we're on the next 5 years because we renewed it for the next 5 years. The bad news is trending next year, we'll start spending more than what we receive based on the forecast. I'm hoping we can do some things that we can push that off another year. But big picture, the 5-year forecast, we're in the black all 5 years. So the one levy that we talked about passing in 2013, but taking us 5 years, according to the forecast here, we're in the black through 2024. So that actually would take us out, 10 years with that one levy. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that although we're going to begin spending more than what we bring in, if that does happen, we're still in good shape because of the carryover we've been able to maintain from the collection of that levy and have that take us on several years and beyond. So just the main point I wanted to bring up with you guys on the forecast, great news. We're in the black for 5 years on this forecast. The cautionary part of that is when we do finally start spending more than we bring in and start eating up into our carryover, that's when we're going to have to start having some discussions about, do we do another levy or how long until we have to in that case. So no scary part on that right now. We're still in great shape, but I do want to make sure that you understand that that's kind of where we're trending. Hopefully not next year, but based on the forecast, that's where we're headed. So any specific questions about?
Dan, I do have one.
Okay.
Now, this money that you're talking about, I think I know, but I want clarification from the expert. So this money has nothing to do with the new school that we're building?
That's correct.
Okay.
This is strictly the general fund. So in
Yeah.
my world, this fund is called 001.
Mhm.
So that's the fund is 001. When it comes to building the school, we have at 010, 9001, which is the local share, which is the bonds that we sold that we're paying back on. We have an 001, 9003, which is where the state money comes in. And we have an 004 account, which is the locally funded initiatives, which was the things that we wanted to do, like the larger gym, the auditorium, and the additional classroom space that wasn't part of the original project that we have to fund locally, which was all part of the advertising for the project when
Yeah.
we passed it. And then there's an 002 account, which is the money that is used to pay off the bonds. So not seen on here and won't ever be on here is we have a $500,000 payment due by the end of the month that is paid semi-annually to pay off the bonds. So
Okay.
that's money that's collected by Warren County and deposited. So I have about, I don't know, you see the funds
Yeah.
when they come through, about 30 or 35 different funds. This is just the general fund, which is just the operation of the school.
Okay, good. Thank you for the clarification.
The only question I have, when we talked about building the school and everything, we talked about the state's projection for growth in the district. I see that our property values estimated went up 9% in the district, but have they readjusted or looked at just general growth in the district to try to figure out where that puts us moving forward?
That would be something that's done by the Warren County.
Okay.
And no, they have not got that specific into our district. That would be something that we would either do on our own, with my own great expertise in that, or to pay somebody to help with that.
Mhm.
And I have not done that.
Would that be some information that might help you create a more accurate 5-year forecast going forward if we could get estimated population growth numbers as well?
I think that if you were able to do that, you'd make a lot of money on your own individually, if you could do that. But
Again,
yes,
it's just estimates. I mean, as we've talked before,
If
the
it-
5-year forecast is just throwing numbers,
The
at
last,
it anyways.
the last one that we
But-
had, the one that the state pays for, shows us actually at a decline
Okay.
over 10 years.
Yeah.
Again, after about 2 years, 3 years, it kind of becomes a
Yeah.
throwing darts kind of.
and then that doesn't take into account the new schools and the fact that
Right.
we have a brand new school and a couple communities right beside us don't.
Yes.
And that's gonna be a big factor in what happens here in the community. So, do I have anything for that? No. Would it be helpful? Yes. Am I willing to pay a whole lot of money to have that? I'm not willing to pay, so I'm gonna try to do that to the best of my ability as we go along. And I'm just not quite there yet. Building's not up. Don't see how it's gonna affect us. We don't see how open enrollment's gonna be affected. I do know that a lot of the houses that are being built here are being bought by people that already live here.
Yeah.
So we're not necessarily adding new people into the district just yet, but I bet we're going to be. But at what type of rate? We're pretty landlocked here.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be a Springboard of 10 years ago. It's not gonna be Little Miami. It's not gonna be, but there will be an increase, and that will help the district. Any increase is great for us.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'll need an approval.
Need a motion?
So moved.
First by Mr. Duncan,
Second?
by Mr. Moore, call the roll, please.
Mr. Dunkman?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart?
Yes.
And Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Thank you. That's my report for the month.
Thank you.
At this time, I will turn it over to our superintendent, Mr. Hook. His report.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell. Several items on non-action nature. First of all, part of the set is still in place here from the production of Clue that our high school students, Theater Arts Group did a fantastic job. It was really outstanding. It was amazing that he could make this room look like it did. So, my congratulations. It was a fantastic performance. Going to the construction, it is moving quickly and continues. We've been fortunate, even with the weather and even with a little bit of the cold that we've had, they continue to move quickly. If you've noticed, the whole north side of the high school section and the back side, of which is on the east side, and now they're moving from east to west on the south side of the high school wing. You're seeing scaffolding going to the rafters. And that's what they're doing now. Is if you look close, you can see the insulation that they put on the outside of the brick, and then they'll put the actual brick. Will start going up on that. But once that insulation is there, they're ready to start painting in some areas. So they'll actually start maybe this month, but certainly in December. And we're looking, enclosing the entire school, which means the roof being in place, was scheduled for January. Knock on wood. This is plastic, but I guess it's the closest thing. There you go. Their goal is to have it enclosed by Christmas. And so obviously when that's done, there's nothing that stops them on the inside. We just got in touch with Duke, and so now they'll be pushing heat into the building once it's sealed. And so it's quite a process. It's moving along very quickly. Well, it had mentioned to me to touch bases on this, but I want people to understand this is such an exciting thing for this community. What this is going to do to this whole section of the town is, I don't think we understand yet the impact in a positive way. It's going to positively impact, and I think it already is impacting property values in a positive way. But the biggest thing, and I don't know if some people do, but I think it's too early yet. There's a paradigm shift that has to happen. Nobody in here is used, well, yeah, my school was small enough way back. That's a long time ago. Way long time ago. But being in a K-12 building is a paradigm shift. We're used to 4 buildings. Well, if you go back, there was a time when they were used to 3 and 2. But that's way back. It is a paradigm shift going into a new environment like this. Not just because it's a new, but because it's a K-12 all under one roof. Okay, so things will be a little bit different. And, you know, I've never heard anybody say we've got too much storage room. You know, I imagine that'll be an issue for some. That's why we are encouraging people to thin out some stuff, take it home for a little while, wait to see how everything fits, okay? It is big enough. The school is big enough. We only have 1,600 students. We could go a couple of hundred, and then if it went crazy, we don't, you know, we could make a decision down the road on open enrollment, which is another. I mean, so there's a lot of room there. But yes, there are enough classrooms for students. The classrooms are bigger than what any of them are here currently that we're used to. What's different? You got a central kitchen. You got one spot instead of 4. Instead of 4 central kitchens and running food from one place to another. Okay? You've got 2 common areas instead of 4 because that's how it's designed, the secondary arena. Now how many can you fit in there? Today, we had the furniture people in and doing the common areas, and you're talking about 330 at least, sitting comfortably, not comfortably, how, in the cafeteria environment. I'll leave it at that. That's a lot of kids. So, that's a lot of bodies. So, I mean, that can be served, and now you think about it, at any one time on both the elementary side as well as on the secondary side, separated by the central kitchen, they don't intermingle. You're talking over 600, 650 kids at a time eating. So there'll be a lot of movement going on, which is a paradigm shift again. So there's a lot of those little things that are going to happen. We'll be fine. In fact, my guess is after about a month of this, that'll be the new norm. And we'll see that. We're going to have to work, you know, but you know, I've heard this before when there was only one story being built out there. Oh, it's not big enough. Yeah, it is. There's a whole nother story going on. So you got twice as much, all right? Other than that little section on Chamberlain, everything around here is on one story. Okay, so yes, it's big enough. People have wondered about the library. Well, if you remember back in 2017, the architects came in and we put together a group of 40 community members, administrators, teachers, some students, businessmen and women. And the decision was 8 hours. Well, of course, it took 8 hours to get to it. It was a drawn out process, and some of you probably were here. Some of you were in it, no. And even on the board. And the whole process is, okay, what is this thing gonna look like? How are we gonna deliver services in the 21st century, which none of us have really done a whole lot of? So you're trying to figure out the trends, academically, what's happening, and what's going on in the marketplace with other school districts, not just in Ohio, but in the area. And part of that is people moving away from these libraries, these large depositories. What they're moving more to are ELAs, or extended learning areas. And so for every grade level in elementary, as well as in the junior high, as well as in the high school, they have these extended learning areas where there'll be like in, let's say, elementary, so it's easier. First grade is in this section. They all empty out. There's this nice big area where they'll have books that are at their Lexile levels. We can hold as many as 1,000 volumes in each one of those. So if you add 1,000 on each one of those, that's more books than we even come close to having even right now. It's just that right now we have it in one spot. So we can still do a reading time and all that stuff. It's just that they don't have to venture far. They don't have to go into this big area. They'll be able to go into the extended learning area. Other things can happen in the extended learning area as well with multimedia. We'll have some interactive HEVs and some things in there. They'll be able to access computers as well. And so that's true in all of those areas. And again, I purposely wasn't there. I was there for all of those meetings, but I purposely didn't, push my ideas and thoughts. I was really the guy that was handing out the markers and kind of facilitating that. It had to come from our community. And that's where it came from. All those decisions, and then those architects synthesized that all and put that together as they developed our programs. Other things that came out of like our focus groups when we decided about the K-12 concept came out of the meetings, all those focus meetings. We had 15 or 17, I can't remember right off the top of my head, back in 2011. We ran them all spring. We had grandparents, a grandparent group. We had parents of high school kids. We had parents of elementary kids. We had parents with no kids or preschool. We had some students. We had business people. We had all these different focus groups that led to that because, to be honest with you, if I talked to 10 people when I first got here, I had 10 different ideas of what we should do with building. None of them were wrong. It's just the question was, what was right for the community? What did the community really want? And so that's when the Schoolhouse of Quality came by and we had hired an architectural firm, which ended up being SHB, inject with them, talk with these people. What is it they want to do? Is this building, knowing it costs this much to maintain, what's the right building for Carlisle? I don't know if I would have guessed right out of the gate it was going to be a pre-K-12, but that's what came out of it ultimately. And so how did it get there? That's how it got there, from our community. Not just what is the best thing, but what would you support? And they resoundingly supported that with a bond passage of nearly 70%, 60s, high 60s. So that's how we got to where we're at. And the question of maintaining any buildings or keeping them, basically that went away in those focus groups because of the cost, additional cost to keeping them. Because not only you now got the cost of this big 210,000 square foot building, but to keep it, and for what? A gym? Is that a smart investment? I don't know. Tell me. The cost of keeping a building, of course they all the roofs are almost shot, okay? If we were staying in any of our buildings, we'd really have to look at that roofing, and each roof is 6 figures. It's not a cheap thing. So I think when you start looking at what the cost of maintaining something, you gotta look at the cost of really, what does that mean? Okay, and who's responsible for that? Okay, and then you do that in light of this 5-year forecast, and you do it in light of that, and you go, will that impact that? Oh yeah. Now, in all likelihood, I can tell you that the first buildings to go are gonna be the high school and Alden Brown. But because Alden Brown and Chamberlain are connected, almost like an umbilical cord. They're connected with the boiler. That may all go at the same time, which puts us in a dilemma that we've talked about. I've been working with construction people, and I know John's a little worried about, but we'll get it. What are we gonna do 1 week after the end of school? Where do we go? Because it's okay, teachers can go if they choose to. Unless you're involved in coaching, or unless you're involved in this, or unless you're involved in band, or then you got, oh, wait a minute, I come back early. Where am I gonna go? Well, we may stay in Grigsby in the short term. Okay, we may have to run all of our offices there because it's the least impactful to the immediate functioning of the new building. Okay, because you gotta have the parking lots in the front, you gotta have the parking lot for the buses on the side, which will impact those other buildings. So the speed at which we can get out will help. So there's a big dance that's gonna happen this spring, you know, and it'll move along. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's gonna be the smoothest thing since silk. I'm not gonna say that. But we know what we gotta do. And so hopefully that kind of answers. I know somebody asked me about all-day kindergarten, and I go, here's the problem with all-day kindergarten. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm for or against it, but if the state's going to spend any money, which they haven't yet, they ought to spend it from birth to grade 5. That's where they need to spend money. If you want to look at brain research and look about how to impact children, once we get kids after kindergarten, we get them caught up. Our teachers do a great job because they come to us all different levels. The state is not funding full-day kindergarten, which means the community would have to. That's why you have so many that don't. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. What I'm saying is the state isn't funding it in the brand new biennium. Didn't come in. So for the next 2 years, it's not funded. I don't know. People have been hollering, but I don't know if there's enough at the state level that that's going to change. Okay? That's funding that we don't have. Okay? I would suggest that if kindergarten spent the majority of the time, which they do, on English language arts, reading and math, we'll be fine. But if all of a sudden I take that and then I add music and art, not that I have anything against that, add lunch, that adds another 2 to 3 hours of time, but I don't think it's going to impact our reading scores. I'm just saying. You got to look at what you're offering. What are we going to teach them? Biology? I don't think so. Not at that age. What do you teach? I don't know. So, point being is, are there good things, bad things? I think if you're in a very depressed area, maybe it's important. Mainly to get kids out of an environment. I don't think that's the case here. I think most of our kids come from very loving environments, by and large. There's exceptions, I'm sure. But until the state funds it, I don't know how you pay for it. So it kind of hits some of the things that I've heard. So anyway, so that kind of, like I said, it's a paradigm shift, but I think it'll be a really positive one. And I think as we get into it, it'll really take off and go well. So with that, I'm going to move into my action items. And under action items B, under 1, classified employment, I need approval for items A through G as listed.
I need a motion.
So moved.
First by Mrs. McIntosh,
Second.
second by Mrs. Lainhart. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. Dunkman,
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Item B2, supplemental resignations. I need approval for items A and B.
Need a motion.
So moved.
First by Mr. Dunkman,
Second?
by Mr. Moore. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Dunkman,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart,
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh.
Yes.
Excuse me. Action item B3, under supplemental employment. Need approval for A, B, and C is listed.
Need a motion?
So moved.
First by Mrs. McIntosh,
I'll second.
and a second by Mrs. Lainhart. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. Dunkman.
Yes.
That concludes my section.
Okay, from Board of Education, do we have anything from the legislation report?
Nothing to report. I'm sure you guys learned way more than I did at Capitol Conference, so.
Anything from CTC?
No.
Nothing. Any old business? Any new business? I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
First by Mr. Moore,
Second.
by Mrs. McIntosh. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mr. Dunkman,
Yes.
Mrs. Lainhart,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell.
Yes.
Time is 6:42.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks.